I'm Lynn Oldshue, and I grew up in Yazoo City. My dad was a catfish farmer, and we grew up on the catfish ponds. I learned how to swim there and had to work in them every summer while my friends were having other much cooler jobs. But my dream was always to go to Mississippi State. My dad went here, we came for all the games. I went to band camp here and loved every minute of going to college. I majored in communications and PR. And I was a road runner, and Jimmy Abraham taught us that always the most important person in the world is the person standing right in front of you. And you have to listen with your whole body, with your eyes, with your ears, let them know how much you care.
So my last semester at State, I got brave and started reporting for the Reflector, thinking that's it, I'm going to go back to my newspaper roots, I'm going to figure it all out, and the angels will sing, and I will know this is what I'm supposed to do. And I was probably less than good, more average, and had zero reason to believe that I should ever write again.
John Grisham was our commencement speaker that year, which was phenomenal. The firm had just come out, but it was also very short because his message was, what you're majoring in today and getting your degree in today, you can forget it because that's not going to be who you grow into. And that always stuck with me because I majored in PR, and I knew that journalism and storytelling was really who I should have been. But my family owned the newspapers in Mississippi, and I didn't want to come out of that and be terrible and be like, oh, she's one of them, but she's horrible at this. So I had zero self-confidence in myself and tried to ignore the whole writing, storytelling thing, and had different jobs, raised two most of the time, great boys. And but that desire to write, it doesn't leave you. It kind of keeps haunting you and screams louder and louder in your head until you have to do something about it. And so I took a writing class with Rick Bragg in Tuscaloosa, and just being able to learn from him and like him say, hey, you can do this, you should be doing this. That's kind of that little boost of confidence that I needed. And so I started a magazine called The Southern Rambler when we lived down in Mobile and Fairhope, that was about art and read about artists and musicians. And that was good, and that was a good experience because no other magazine would hire me, so I just had to figure it out myself. But I interviewed Vincent Lawson. He's a black photographer down in Mobile, and I had conversations with him. We became friends after that interview. And I had conversations with him and learned more about life than I had with anybody else. And he opened my eyes to what it was like to be a black man in the South, and his focus was on the homeless, and those were things that were off my radar. And so we became good friends, and he made me so much more aware of the bigger world and the stories there. So we, as a project together, we rode the buses in Mobile for months. And here I was, the first day I was terrified, thinking, I am this 6 foot tall, redheadish haired white woman, stepped on this bus, they're going to reject me, they are going to be angry at me. I had all these reasons in my head why I was going to be thrown off the bus. And it was completely not that. They moved over, they told me their stories about taking the bus to chemo and to work and to going to get groceries and dialysis. Their car had broken down and they couldn't afford the carburetor, so the public transportation was all they had. And they were so kind to me, and just like someone would bring me gum, we became this community on this bus. And that's when I learned that all the walls were mine. And if you approach somebody with love, they're gonna give it right back. And they just wanted to know that their life, their story mattered, because they knew to most people they were invisible. The bus just looks like a rolling billboard for personal injury lawyers. But they were so glad that somebody, no matter who it was just taking the time to listen. And they taught me more lessons on that. But there were a couple of them. I stepped off the bus, and there was Sheena and Zion Williams, and they're adorable children. And for me, there was the voice that said, that's it, you have to meet them. And so I talked to them, and they rode the bus for 6 hours every day just to get their kids to a great preschool and then to go to work. And she worked at 2 jobs, 60 hours a week. He worked construction. That their whole life revolved around riding the bus. And so they started telling me their story. So instead of just me telling it, we started shooting video of them and kind of with the bus riders, because I wanted it to be in their own words. For 6 months, I rode the bus with the bus riders, and I figured out that was it. I had been searching all my life for who I am and what I'm supposed to be, and my voice is to be given the voice to the voiceless. And after that, everything changed. We did the video with Zion and Sheena just to show their life. I mean, it's so much more impactful when it's them. We rode the bus with them. We went into their homes. They told how important the bus ride was to them. We got to meet their kids. And again, another part of storytelling is video, and I love that too. So trying to bring in more and more video into our Southern Souls and doing documentaries from the stories I do. But our Southern Soul started from there. After we got off the bus and read the story, everything else kind of felt meaningless. And we have talked through domestic violence, addictions, the death of a child to gun violence, people who've gone through the most horrific things you can imagine. And they get up the next morning and they keep trying again. And at some point, they make it through, and then they reach back and try to help others going through it. And to me, that is everything. Someone who has made mistakes or gone through something awful, and then they learn from it. One of my favorites is Henry Hall. He's an artist in Mobile who is just, his whole backyard is all art, things he's picked up from the thrift store. He makes anything out of everything. And he was big into Mardi Gras, and he's just so much the spirit of Mobile to me. So did his story, but his story, he is way too big for just my words. So we did another video of him. And he is the one and only Henry Hall.
I got all these little dolls, and I pick up and buy them over at the thrift shop. And come into me, and I like all my wood knots and weird things and some unusual to have around to make something come to view. Over here is the Empire State Building I done back about 12 years ago. And I ain't never framed it yet. And all these things come off of McDonald's and all these things that you see. I got all
He turned 90 in July, and he was so proud of getting to 90, but then he passed away right after that. So for me too, I have this video of Henry getting to tell his story, and like it's saving the past and preserving him, so it kind of lives on forever. That's one thing, if you do this long enough, people start passing away. I will interview anybody over 90 years old because that's touching history, and there's so much to learn from those generations, and I want to save their stories and pass them down. One of them that we interviewed was Catherine Phillips Singer. Jake and I interviewed her in June of 2019, and then we ran her story, a bunch of World War II stories in November. And I called her 2 weeks after her story ran just to check on her, and she was so happy it did. And then, but she said that's the last time anybody will ever tell my story. And then she died 2 weeks later. My favorite she told was of riding the train to Auburn and how she met all these young men that were going to Fort Benning, I think. And her little tricks to meet them and make pen pals. So I'm gonna let her tell her story in her voice.
The only way I could get to Auburn was go by train. So I rode up and back on the train, which was a 6-hour trip. And the trains carried the armed forces all over America. So each car would be packed with boys in uniform. And I usually sat between the cars on somebody's duffel bag. And I got wise. I started doing needlepoint. So I would pull out my needlepoint and start to sew, and along would come some nice young man and said, "What are you doing?"
Smooth.
Doing needlepoint.
Smooth.
Show me how you do it. It's on the chair in the living room. Usually they'd say, "Will you write to me?" You know, one or two of them, "Would you write to me?" I'd say, sure. We would exchange addresses.
Doing 1,800 interviews, I've done them around the world. I've done them in Morocco, in Cuba, the UK, Puerto Rico. There are a couple of truths I know for certain in life from this is that we're all saints and sinners. We all are capable of great good and also capable of the sins and hurting each other and making bad choices and making bad decisions. But also too that you can't judge a book by the cover. However you try to insert someone else's story, fill in their narrative, you're going to be wrong every time. I've done this 1,800 times, I've been wrong 1,800 times, and I'll be wrong every other time I do this. So when I talk to school kids, they terrify me, so I have to have games with them to make this easier. I play a game with them, it's called Can't Judge a Book by the Cover, and I show them a picture of a face of someone I've interviewed and give them a minute and let them try to figure out the story, and then they tell me what they think, and then I tell them what the real story is. I almost died. I was an organ donor, and they were ready to give my liver to someone else. I got down to 90 pounds with a feeding tube. I was addicted to morphine in the hospital. I was an angry 18-year-old with a shaved head who couldn't walk and had to wear diapers. I went from living by myself to being unable to be alone or do anything for myself. The determination of not letting that be the last chapter of my life got me through it. My doctor told me that no one else who has been shot in the head like this has come back to talk with them. He said, "I guess in 2 years you'll know what you were stuck with." I didn't want a life like that. I can do so much more than the doctors expected me to. Dr. King once helped us escape from a church when the police were coming for us. When young people from SNCC came down for a workshop with Dr. King, I wanted to meet them, so I went too. John Lewis was there, and we became friends. Later, when SNCC was looking for a white Southerner to join its staff as a campus traveler to interpret the student movement to other young Southerners, I was hired. I went to SNCC to marches across the South and was arrested with everyone else. During a march in Macomb, Mississippi, chains and pipes came from nowhere, and our people were getting hit. A small mob of white men gathered around me. Every time someone hit me, the cops winked or looked the other way. I clutched the Bible, and other members of SNCC moved to my sides and absorbed some of the blows. None of us attempted to fight back. My tattoo says, "Each of my teeth is a murdered king." It was a joke my boyfriend, David, said because whenever your teeth die, they get crowns put on them. That joke was one of the first things I read that he wrote. It made me laugh. I had to get it on my body, even if no one else understands it. We dated for 6 years and we're going to get married. David died 6 months ago. He would have been 25 this year. He felt fine one day, and the next day his body shut down. He passed in April, and everything fell to the ground. I make art, and it's gotten me through this. He was an artist and brought me to where I am now. I also have a ghost tattoo, because he is always with me. Owen was born at Children's and Women's Hospital in Mobile. 2 hours later, they rushed him to UAB Hospital in Birmingham. His bowels were on the outside of his stomach. His first 5 months of life were in the hospital. His intestines were in a tube, and he had 5 surgeries to slowly put them back in. His body wasn't big enough for his intestines. Owen inspired me to read. I couldn't read or write until I was 22. My wife wanted me to go to the grocery store and handed me a check. I said I couldn't write. We had been married for a year, and she didn't know I was illiterate. I even went to school with her, but I made it through school working on teachers and the principal's cars. I quit school in 9th grade because working on cars is all I wanted to do. My wife tutored at the American Literacy Council in Mobile and got me a tutor. I learned to read in 2 years. I never thought I would learn to read and write. I'm teaching Owen to slow down and enjoy life while he has it. I'm just a ticket taker at this right field gate at Dudy Noble. This is God's gate, but He loaned it to me. Prayer changes things. We pray before we invite y'all in. We pray for the fans, the players, and our visitors. Before people leave this stadium, we want to put inspiration in all hearts, no matter where they come from. I'm 65 years old and going strong. Before I enter the stadium, I ask God to give me hope and love to someone who needs it. I let them know it's all going to be all right. We're doing this life together. Hail State.
If you give people kindness and you listen and you show them that you care, then that opens all the doors. And I'm hoping that by walking and reading these stories and walking through somebody else's shoes, all my journalism is based on this too, of taking a hard story like sex trafficking or domestic violence or poverty or the working poor, and taking a complex subject like that and getting to know the people involved in it and their stories, and then that hits home. It's something you can understand, that's something you can relate to. Because I think knowing stories breaks down fear. I mean, I still believe in storytelling and journalism, and that's how we find our common ground again and stop fearing each other. Because if you know somebody's stories, you can't fear them. All you can do is love them.